Hello and welcome to the Pots Trowels podcast with me, Martin, Sean and Jill.
Hello.
Hi.
And we're all gathered around the kitchen studio table.
Don't forget Marley. Marley's here as well.
We've got Marley as well, our guard dog. And later on, I'm going to be having a chat with a leading authority, Steve Hickman, all about Agapanthus.
We've got some jobs coming up, including one that ties in with a question on wisteria. And remember, if you've got a question, drop us an email, info@potsandtrowels.com.
We've got a shout out to some regular Pots and Trowels listeners. But first, let's hear about Steve's fascinating journey to growing Agapanthus.
So, Steve, you've worked in horticulture all your life, but how did it all start for you? What made you become a horticulturist?
Well, I think back in the distant past, and it is distant, I'd be at infant school, the teacher gave me some cactus to take home to look after. And most of them got back to school, but some stayed with me for donkey's years. I'm 68 now, and I must have been about 8 years old when I got these cactus. So I've been growing for sort of 60 years. That developed a good collection. And then I started growing conifers and heathers in my early teens, a bit of extra pocket money. Went to Askham College in 75, went to Cambridge Botanics 76, the year of the drought, and then back to Askham to finish off. And then when I qualified at 21, I went out to Fiji in the Pacific on VSO, growing vegetables.
What's a VSO?
It's Voluntary Service Overseas.
Oh, right, yes.
It's the equivalent of the American Peace Corps or this New Zealand VSA.
Right.
It's Voluntary Service Overseas. And they're still operating now and doing a wonderful job. And then when I came back, I went on an overseas contract to Saudi Arabia with Blakedown Landscapes, growing tropical plants. Came back, got a job with the same firm in Hong Kong, again growing tropical plants for the landscaping contracts. That's where I met my wife Elaine. Yesterday was his 39th wedding anniversary.
Yes, happy anniversary.
We set up Oil and Plant Centre about 41 years ago. We've been on the same site ever since. That's my life history. Apart from in between growing plants, we had 3 children, and we've got 5.5 grandchildren now. The next one being born in January.
Lovely. And we'll talk more about the business now. But when you were young, did you ever think you would, you started growing the cactus and got involved? So is that really what made you think I want to go into horticulture? Because, were your family in horticulture?
No, my earliest memories of growing plants, my father was a coal miner, and traditionally back in the day, all the coal miners in the village grew chrysanthemums for the autumn shows, tomatoes, geraniums for the bedding, their own vegetables, because after the war type of thing, when I was born in 56, there were still shortages of everything, still black and white TVs. So I was growing vegetables with my father from, my earliest memories, from sort of crawling about, putting pea seeds in and beans. So really, horticulture was in my blood from before I can even remember. And then I started growing plants up with my father. So it was just a natural progression to go into horticulture.
Yeah.
I didn't want to go into parks departments where most people did, or steelworks or coal mines at the time. I wanted to go a little bit further. So I ended up at Askham College.
Right. So going down the pit was never going to be an option for you?
I'm a bit claustrophobic. I don't even like flying so much these days.
Right.
I like to be in the open air with the smells and the wildlife.
Absolutely, yeah, totally. I understand that completely, coming from a mining family myself.
Yeah.
So the business that you've got now, Oil and Plant Centre, I know when you first started it, you used to grow a mixture of all different sorts of plants, but you've concentrated for a long time on South African plants, haven't you? With probably Agapanthus being the one that you're most well known for. So what took you down that path?
Well, I'm a propagator by trade, and we used to grow about 400 different plants, alpines, anything I could grow from seed or root from a cutting. We used to grow about 400 different plants, alpines, heathers, shrubs, trees, you name it. But must have been about 35 years ago, my daughter, who was only probably 5 or 6 years old, brought me an Agapanthus from the Castle Bromwich show near Birmingham for my birthday in June. huge flowers, which sort of intrigued me and fascinated me. I'd seen these in flower when I was passing through New Zealand. They had hundreds of JCBs in Auckland Harbour dredging it to build the harbour. This was back in the day. And a huge pile of Agapanthus, all in flower. It was marvellous. At the time I didn't really know what they were, but that image is stuck in my mind. So when I got this for my birthday years and years later, it triggered that memory, and I started sort of collecting Agapanthus. A couple of years later, when we got quite a few, we decided to stop general propagation and specialise in Agapanthus. And well, it was a risk, but we're still doing Agapanthus today. We do a lot more South African varieties. We do the Tulbagias, we do the Nerines, the Amarines, the Clivias, and it's all South African. And it's led to me going to South Africa for 2 or 3 weeks every September when it's their spring, for the last probably 7 or 8 years.
Yeah. And you've probably got the largest collection, I would think, of Agapanthus, because you're not only growing them to sell, but you've got a national collection as well, haven't you?
Yeah, we've got a national collection of Agapanthus we've had for years, and Tulbagias. We've also got a national collection of Clivias or Clivias, and recently, a couple of years ago, we got the national collection of Amarine, which is the cross between a Nerine bowdenii and the Amaryllis belladonna.
Yeah, so all the South African plants, which do surprisingly well in our British climate as well, don't they? We always think South Africa, we can't grow their plants, but they do very well.
They do very well, providing you mimic the natural conditions. They like it well drained, so 2 parts John Innes number 3 to 1 part alpine grit. Mix it up and plant them into that, because you're mimicking the slopes on the hillsides and the cliffs where they grow naturally. They like a good high potash feed spring to autumn. Our own feeds make to our own specifications, and it's really, really excellent, because you're mimicking nature where the leaves naturally rot and the flower stems and the bird droppings. So you're mimicking the fertilisers in the natural habitat. They like a decent amount of water because it rains quite regularly where they grow, but it's free draining. So if you mimic nature, then you can't really go far wrong.
Yeah. And growing out there in South Africa with the Agapanthus, is it just limited species? Because nowadays, looking at your stand here, you've got dark blues, you've got whites, you've got bicoloured ones, pale blues, all different shades. But presumably they don't all grow in the wild like that, do they?
No, in the wild, and years ago when we first started with Agapanthus, you mainly got different shades of blue. You got your pale blues, you got your dark blues, and you got your whites, and that was it. But there are probably, depending what authority you go by, about 7 different species and subspecies of Agapanthus. The main one being the praecox, the large-leafed evergreen one, and the campanulitis, the herbaceous one. And because of modern hybridisation and selecting freaks of nature when you get a specific colour, by hybridising these, like you've just said, there's loads of different shades of blue, bicolours, dark purples, blacks. There's a lot of different colours now. But when you buy an Agapanthus, you must differentiate. There's 2 types. The evergreen types, which tend to have the larger flowers, are not so hardy in our northern climate, so we recommend them for patio pots.
Yeah.
But the campanulitis types and the hybrids, they're the herbaceous ones, or deciduous, whichever way you want to call it, what die back in autumn and come back in spring. They're the hardy ones which you can plant in your border and leave. They're hardy to -15.
Okay.
So make sure you know what you're doing. All Agapanthus can go in pots, but because the pot freezes from all directions and below, you don't want to get them wet and freeze in winter. That's bad news, not just for Agapanthus but for a lot of things.
Absolutely, yeah. And you have done over the years quite a lot of hybridising and introduced quite a few new cultivars, haven't you?
Yeah, we've introduced quite a few, mostly hardy Agapanthus, since we're from the north, you might guess with the accent. The latest one we've done was a really nice, huge, dark, proper blue Agapanthus called Steve's Mega Blue. It ended up being called that because I've bred Agapanthus for years now and called them after different people, but never after myself. So my family says it's time you called one after yourself, and they called it Steve's Mega Blue.
Yeah.
I don't know where the mega came from.
I've not a clue, Steve, but it's obviously got a big flowering.
Well, it has.
Yeah, good.
It has. We launched that at Chelsea last year, and it's done very, very well. It's the largest dark blue evergreen that you can possibly get. And the year before we launched a new one, again a new very large hardy mid-blue one, and we called it after the wife, Elaine Ann.
Oh, right.
So we're keeping it in the family.
Keeping it in the family. Good. Well, we'll look out for more of those. What we're going to do, we'll take a little break, and then we're going to come back and get some tips on how to care for them in the garden.
Fantastic to create something new. It sounds a very technical process, doesn't it? But then when it's flowering and it appears in flower and you've got a new colour, that's just magical, isn't it?
I was just thinking as well as like something new, something blue, going for a rhyme there with the mega blue.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the thing is, Steve does quite a lot of hybridising, and you never know what you're going to get. No. So they'll sow hundreds of seeds and have to grow them for several years to get them to flowering size. And then the majority of them will probably be that they either dump them or they might just sell them off as a seedling, but never will be named. Yeah. And they'll probably only pick one or two out of a big batch that are worthy of naming.
And then if one's been hybridised, and it's come through and it, I don't know, is like a large blue one that you're happy with. That's what I'm thinking. the seeds from that should produce another mega blue.
No.
Oh, okay.
No, because then the seeds off that will then... because it's
revert
open pollinators. So what they do then, they have to either do it by division. So the slow way and the old fashioned way is you let that clump up into a plant, then after 4 or 5 years you chop it into individual little bits. So you probably get 10, 15 plants from it, but that's really slow if you want thousands. So they have them micro propagated. So there are these laboratories where it's all done in laboratory conditions, and they take the meristem, the tip of the growing tip, and just take a few cells and grow them in a culture in a laboratory.
Wow.
Which is done on lots of plants nowadays. Vicky Fox, who we spoke to on a video a few weeks ago, Plant a Go-Go, most of the new varieties of heucheras are done the same way, and I know Steve has quite a lot of them micro-propagated. So then they get them as tiny little plants, maybe a year or two old, in little cells, and then they grow them on in a small pot. So it's quite a lengthy process, a lot of work. So from doing that, probably sowing the seeds initially to having enough to sell could be 7-8 years probably.
And would that have been, obviously this laboratory stuff is brand new, but back in the day, if you wanted to create a new plant, did you have to just spend ages and ages with different varieties just trying?
Yeah, the same process of hybridising, that's the same as it's always been. It's the bulking up. When you want 20,000 to launch them, you'd just have to keep dividing them, and then you'd spend 4 or 5 years building up enough stock to have enough to sell on the open market. So it's much faster with the micro propagation.
You've no idea that when you go to a flower show and you walk past all these nursery exhibitors, you've no idea what's happening in the background, have you really?
No, and they we need to give a little shout out for them, because they are, a lot of them, like Steve and a lot of the ones we see at all the flower shows, are specialists in their own field. And once they go, they will never be replaced. So we need to support them and encourage people to take the businesses on.
It's worth mentioning, actually, on YouTube we have a playlist which I'll link to in the show notes, of all what we call masterclasses, which is when Martin and Jill go and film with these specialist growers. So we've got all sorts from heucheras and fuchsias through to, well, there's all sorts on there. I think if I listed them all.
Well, and we're chatting to Steve in the next couple of weeks for a video, aren't we? When we catch up with him at one of the flower shows.
So look out for the Agapanthus special.
Yeah.
I look forward to that catch-up masterclass on Agapanthae. Agapanthae? Is that a thing? Agapanthus.
Right, so I just want to pick up on something that you were chatting about with Steve, Martin, and you talked about John in his number 3, and I'm just wondering, I've got a little bit of an idea of what it is, but maybe some of our listeners would like a bit more of an explanation.
Right, well, John in his compost, I'm not sure whether that's just an English thing or whether it's in the States or spread around, but it was developed way back, and you've put me on the spot now, but it's probably going back to the 1930s or 40s, and it was developed as a general purpose growing compost, and it essentially is 7 parts sterilised loam, and which is basically a soil-free draining but moisture retentive, 3 parts peat, and 2 parts sharp grit mixed together with added nutrients. So there was a formula put together for the nutrients and a bit of lime, and that was a general purpose that was used throughout horticulture. You know, when I started growing as an apprentice gardener, we used to use John Innes. That was then replaced, obviously, by peat-based compost on a huge scale. You can still get John Innes compost, but it's nowhere near as good as the compost when it was handmade. It's quite a sandy bag of compost. So if you are buying some John Innes compost, I would then mix it with a multi-purpose and some grit, just to get that sort of moisture retention and free draining. But that's what John Innes is, and it was developed at the John Innes Institute. So that's how it came about.
It's recipes, is it? Why is there a number 3? Is there a number 1, 2, 3? Is it 3 like version 3? Or?
No, that's a good question. Does John Innes number 1, number 2 and number 3? The only difference in them is it's still 7:3:2, the ratio for the ingredients. It's the amount of fertiliser. So 2 is twice as strong.
Oh, like a strength
It
thing.
just doubles up each time. So you'd start young plants off in 1. As they got bigger, they need more feed. They'd go in number 2. When they mature, they'd be in a number 3.
Oh, you see, I didn't know that.
Oh, I'm just a font of all useless knowledge.
If only we could learn this stuff at school.
Exactly.
Go to Trinidad and Tobago, and you can if you've listened to last week's podcast.
That's
We were
right,
talking
yes.
about that. So go and check that out if you haven't already. And just while on the subject of it, get in touch with us. Drop us an email, info@potsandtrowels. Ask us a question and leave us a review if you've got 5 minutes. That really helps us get to more people.
Well, I have got a question from Andrea, who is
excellent.
one of our top listeners. So hi to you, Andrea.
Hi, Andrea.
And they've got a fairly new garden, which we've been listening and hearing about over the last few podcasts with various questions. But they've just had an oak pergola built, and it does look lovely. She sent us a photo of it. It faces west, and it can get quite windy, especially in the winter. So the pergola is over the patio. This time of the year, they get sun from about 11 till 7, and we are, where are we now? Sort of mid to late August, aren't we? And then it disappears behind an 11-foot wall and fence combination. So they want to grow something up it. So do you think that she could grow a wisteria successfully up there, and or a jasmine clotted cream together with an evergreen star jasmine? I won't begin to say the Latin name of that. Thank you. Jasminoides.
That's right, yes.
So what are your recommendations, Martin?
Right.
What do you think to her choices?
Well, your pergola, David and Andrea, looks amazing. And it was lovely to catch up with you because she came to see us at the Tatton Flower Show a few weeks ago. So that was really nice to see you there. Pergola looks amazing. I mean, on its own, it's a work of art, but I can understand you love your plants and you want to grow something up it. All of those, I think, would grow. I mean, the wisteria, the wisteria likes a sunny position, and I think the fact you've got sun on it from 11 till 7 through the summer, you've got 8 hours, and it's still going to have reasonable light, so that's going to be absolutely fine. And that would, go over there, and you could train it and prune it back, so that would work a treat. I also think the jasmine, the clotted cream, that would be fine, but that's not as vigorous, so that would probably go up 1 or 2 of the posts, and that's a lovely small flowering cream coloured jasmine, and it's got quite
a scent on those, is it?
It's not a strong scent on it, but it has got quite an unusual scent. But they're nice to have, and they flower for quite a long period, but very small flower on it. And the star jasmine, the Trochleospermum jasminoides, is an evergreen. Now, you're up in Lancashire. I think you'd be okay because you don't get particularly cold winters, but they do need a little bit of protection. But you are going to get a lot of rain up there, so just make sure it's got good drainage. So I think you could grow that up the posts as well. So
That's quite a lot, though, isn't it?
It's a big pergola.
Is this an or a
or all 3? I mean, it's a big pergola from what we've seen. So if I were going for 2, I would do the wisteria and the Trochleospermum because then you'd have a bit of evergreen foliage over the winter, and they flower right the way through the summer, and they are so sweetly scented.
Oh, that's top tips. I'd like to see the pergola myself now. I'll have to pass on the photo. There is another question that we've had on YouTube about apple pruning, actually. We had a video recently about summer pruning Bramley apple tree. So this person, Simon Noble, I think it is, heavily pruned, overgrown, espaliered and immensely woollied aphid infested, that's a word, tongue twister, woolly aphid infested Bramley last autumn. It's grown back well, but I've only just seen your excellent video on water shoots. So now I've got over 100 new shoots that are over 2 feet long. Help, any advice greatly received.
Okay, well, this came as about from we pruned a big mature Bramley apple tree back in the winter, and big old 100-year-old tree with great big thick branches. So by cutting it hard back, that has stimulated this strong new growth, which we call water shoots, and they're just strong vertical shoots. Now, if we left them, the tree would look like a hedgehog. So what we were doing is actually tearing some of them off. Rather than cutting them off, we were tearing them off, and then you take the bud out at the base and they don't grow back. And I've done some. I've got to get up in the tree again, probably get Jill up there doing some. So we don't want the tree to get too overcrowded. But you say yours is an espalier. So an espalier, for those that don't know, is where you train them on a fence or a wall, and it's going out on horizontal. So you got a vertical stem with then horizontal branches going out. So very formal. So with yours, it's not too much of a problem because you would normally be pruning them back at this time of the year. So rather than ripping them off, then I would just prune them back down to where they grew from, to short little growth. If you think there's too many, you could remove some completely. But what we do with espaliers and cordons and stepovers at this time of the year is prune all the summer growth, this tall extension growth that can be a couple of feet, back down to just a couple of inches. It won't grow any more than for this year, and it's on those short little growths that you leave that we call spurs is where the blossom will appear next year. So on your espalier, it's not quite as big a problem to sort out because you want that new growth.
Okay, sounds like promising stuff. So I shall make sure that they know to listen to the podcast for the details, and I'll pop an answer, a briefer answer on the YouTube comment. Brilliant. Well, I think we've got more to hear about Agapanthus, though, haven't we?
We have. Let's go back to Steve.
So, Steve, you mentioned that there are two types of Agapanthus. You've got the evergreens and you've got the deciduous that die back every winter, and it's the hardier ones are the deciduous ones, so they're suitable for planting in the borders, and maybe the evergreen ones in pots, or if you live somewhere very mild. So, what's the difference in care for those, and how hardy are both of them, and what can you do with them?
Right, yeah, as you say, you've got two types. The evergreen ones are not so hardy, and the herbaceous ones are hardy. But all Agapanthus in containers need protection in winter because the pot freezes from all directions and from below. Doesn't matter if they're evergreen or herbaceous. But if you're growing Agapanthus in containers, as smaller plants, they do like to be restricted. So if you're growing a Agapanthus from a 3-inch, 9-centimetre pot, you can put 3 of those in a 12-inch container. And they can be in that container for 2 years and pot them on in the third spring because that gets them root bound quick and the flower the first year after potting. Or you can put 1 3-inch pot into a 6-inch container and again leave it for 2 years before potting. Feed them from mid-March to the end of September every fortnight with a good high potash feed. We've got our own feeds we use, 12-12-32, very, very high potash, whereas your tomato feeds, they're 7 to 10% potash, so they're okay for what they're meant for,
so
but they're not meant for
really
Agapanthus.
Important, that potash, to ripen them and get them to flower.
That potash, you get good root, you get good leaf, you get good flower. It's common sense that you water them well early November, around about bonfire time, and then you put them away somewhere to keep the pot on the dry side right over winter and start watering again at the end of February. And we put ours either in a cold glass house, a cold polythene tunnel, or if you haven't got that, a shed or a garage, if it's an evergreen type, next to the window, so they get a bit of sunlight. If it's a herbaceous one, you can put it anywhere because they don't really need light. So they're so easy to grow like that in containers. Do keep the container well moist through the spring and summer because they don't like to dry out. Although, if you are going on holiday and you give them a real good soaking with water, you can go on holiday for a fortnight because they are drought tolerant plants.
Right.
If you get a drought forecast with Agapanthus, you don't need to worry.
Because I suppose they're used to that in South Africa, aren't they, in their summers? Yeah.
Even the evergreen ones in South Africa, if there's a drought for a couple of years, the leaves will die back just to the rhizomes and the roots, because the rhizome and the roots are storage water organs. So if you do go away and you forget to water your Agapanthus, it comes back and all the leaves are dead and brown. Don't worry, it's just gone into the survival mode. If you start watering again, it'll regrow without any problem.
Okay. If you've got the evergreens in pots and you live in a very mild area south of England, could you still leave them out then? Do you think it's the frost, isn't it? As long as you're not in a frost-prone area, you'll be okay.
It's wet and the cold. If you live on the south coast, it's not as crucial that you protect them like just mentioned, because we're in the north, so we're always on the safe side. But if you're in the south, you can get away with actually Agapanthus, the evergreen ones, planted in borders, and you see plenty around Penzance area, Devon and Cornwall, in roundabouts and on the coast, in coastal plantings. They've been there donkey's years, but the climate there is totally different for us up in Yorkshire.
Up in the north, that's right, exactly. And I know you always, talk about the flowering, the feeding with the high potash through the summer and into sort of autumn. That is inducing the flower buds for the following year, isn't it? So, so that's why that frost protection is necessary, because I suppose if they freeze, it will kill the flower buds, will it?
That's right. The ones in the border, which are hardy to -15, we still recommend that you put a bark layer over the top of them, simply because, well, one of the most common questions we're asked at all the flower shows, with plenty of leaf but no flower. Now that's two reasons: either people are not feeding them with the correct high potash fertiliser, or not feeding at all, or they're feeding the wrong fertiliser with too much nitrogen and you get leaf. But the other reason is the flower buds are produced the year before flowering, so when you've got Agapanthus in flower now, the buds are forming in the rhizome and just after flowering for next year. And because the buds are just under the surface, if you don't mulch them, if a bad frost can kill the buds. So hence you're going to get plenty of leaf, because the plant's hardy to -15, but the flowers are not.
Right, okay, so hence that mulch, it's like putting a duvet over them, isn't it? A blanket just to keep them protected.
Yeah.
And what about, dividing them? Because, I know people, and they like the roots restricted, but they can get overcrowded, can't they?
Yeah.
So when would you lift them or divide them if you've got them in a pot?
Well, Agapanthus in containers must be divided in spring, because like we've just said, they make the flower buds in the rhizome the year before. So if you divide in autumn, you're going to affect the plant, you're going to frighten the plant to death, and it's going to abort the bud formation, so you're not going to get them into flower. Plus, cutting the rhizomes at that time of year, they've got all winter to rot, and that's probably what they will do.
Right.
If you divide them in spring, the buds have already formed in the rhizome, so even if you chop them down into the individual shoots, if the bud formed the year before, that plant will flower.
Right.
And it's not going to rot, because in springtime the temperatures are rising, the plants are wanting to naturally grow, so if you make a mistake you'll get away with it.
Yeah.
And then pot them on into the well draining compost. If you split a plant in spring, straight down the middle. If you damage any of the growing points, don't worry, just discard them. Knock a bit of the old compost off the bottom and pot it into a pot just larger than the root ball that you've got. And a large plant, if you've potted it on several times every 2 years, you could well divide that into 4. So you get 4 pots, just a bit larger than the clumps you've got.
Yep.
Leave them while the day after you've cut them, because the cut will bleed. But the day after it'll have sealed up, it'll have healed itself, like we do if we cut ourselves.
Yeah, because it's a big fleshy rhizome, isn't it?
Yeah. And if you do that, and you pot it the next day, if you happen to water it too much or it rains for a fortnight, the plant's not going to rot.
Right, okay. Good. And when you are cutting them, it is quite tough. You don't need just a little knife. You need sort of like an axe or something.
You can use a bow saw and saw through vertically down the clump. Or my son uses a electrical reciprocating saw.
Yeah,
that takes a bit the same if you've got false teeth. Or you can use a machete or a big knife, whichever's easiest. But I find a bow saw is a bit slower, but it's a lot safer.
Right, yes, you can control
And don't worry
it.
about cutting them roots, because they'll stand it. And they'll be all the better for it.
Right, okay. Now I'm going to, one final question. This is a personal one. I got some plants off you. I've got several plants off you over the years, and it is Silver Moon, the variegated one. Lovely herbaceous one. It dies down. It's got a lovely cream and green variegated leaf and a lovely pale blue flower. And I've got it in a pot. It's one of these pots that's going to be difficult to get out of, but it's completely filled the pot. It's probably about 14 inches by 14 inches, this pot, square, completely full of beautiful, healthy foliage. And this year we've probably got 40 or 50 flower spikes on it at the moment. It's the best it's ever been. Would I take that out and divide it because it's filled the pot, or if while it's flowering so well, just leave it for another few years?
Is it in a pot that you can slip it out of easily? Or
No,
is
it's got a rim. It's one of these with the silly ones with like a rim on the inside. So I'm probably going to have to smash the pot to get it out. But I'm not too worried about that. But it's whether it will, because if they get so overcrowded, the flower numbers can reduce. But do you think if I just keep feeding it with the high potash feed, it will perform again next year?
Right, there's two answers to that. The first answer is you can give it to me as a gift.
Yes.
And forget all about
Yeah,
it, and I
and
can
you
give
can
you a
worry
little
about
one
it.
back.
Thank you.
Or you can smash the pot. But what I would do this year, I would feed it properly every 2 weeks up to autumn, get it up into peak condition, because Agapanthus, if they're fed properly, get through winter a lot easier.
Yeah.
It's a hardy one anyway, and I'd wait while springtime, and then if it's got a lip, because if you overwinter it dry, they tend to shrink a little bit.
Yes,
So
they
that's the
do.
easiest time
Yes.
before you start to water. But if you can't get it out, then smash your pot. And if it's so large, I would divide it into, say, 4 or even more.
Yeah.
Repot into pots just a little bit larger than the clump that you've got, and you've got 4 lovely plants.
Okay, and that
So-
one can go in the garden as well, can't it? 'Cause I
It
might
can.
put a-
It's hardy actually. That's a -18.
Oh, right.
It's a lovely plant, and you'll end up with 4 plants. So, as you always plant in 3s, you've got a spare one, which you can
Exactly.
still let me have.
Yeah, you can have that back then and send it you back. Thank you, Steve. That's great. Well,
You're
that's a little
welcome.
job for me. Thanks for explaining some of the myths about Agapanthus, which are so
Anytime.
popular. All right,
And
Steve.
there's lots of information on our website, www.somethingforthegarden.co.uk, and my phone numbers are there, and you can ring me anytime. Anybody can ring just for advice.
Okay.
And we have a real good website. We can get the feed and loads of nice plants.
Yes, mail order. We'll put all those details on the show notes as well, Steve. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Cheers.
Well, that's a first. It's not often we get Martin asking a question. You're normally answering the questions.
Well, nobody knows it all, and Steve is the go-to person when it comes to Agapanthus. So yeah, but he twisted it round, didn't he? He's managed to get a chunk of that Agapanthus.
He was having
back.
some back, wasn't he? Yeah. Basically, he gets his plant back, doesn't he?
Yeah,
Effectively.
and I've actually planted one. I've got the big one in the pot, which is full
It
of
is
flower at the moment. It's the
beautiful.
best
Yeah.
it's ever flowered. But I've got another one, a small one, which we're looking out now
Yeah, we can
onto
see
the
it.
garden, and it's just planted in the border because, as we know, it's hardy to -18.
18.
So hopefully next year we'll get some flowers, and it's a variegated one. And as I've mentioned in previous podcasts, I
You
love
like it.
He's a
It's
bit of a fan of the variegation.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll try and get a picture of your large Agapanthus on our Instagram so people can have a look at it. We are at P Trowels, I think, or something like that. I'm sure you'll find it if you search Pots and Trowels. And obviously, if you've got a question for Martin, just a quick reminder, info@potsandtrowels.com is our email address. And potsandtrowels.com has got all our links to all our videos and all our podcast episodes, so you can always check it out there. And if you've got 5 minutes to just leave us a review on your podcast provider's place of reviewing. I don't know what it's called. What's it called? I don't know. You probably listen to us on Apple
Reviewing.
Podcasts, but
Yeah.
Apple Podcasts. But if you're not, wherever you're listening to it, leave us a review.
Yeah.
It'd be
I'm
really
sure our
helpful.
listeners know.
They
what
probably know
it
more
is,
about it
don't
than I do, to be
Yeah.
honest.
So, are we feeding our Agapanthus in pots?
We are
Oh, is that
feeding
the
our-
royal we?
Well, I think you feed more than me.
Who fed it last?
You
I think
tend
it
to
was
do
me, to be fair.
I do the greenhouse. You
Yeah.
tend to do the outside pots.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
it's actually do a feed.
It is.
It is do a feed.
It is definitely.
Yes, so-
Now, you were chatting to Steve about feed things and
Oh, the
getting
potash
a bit
thing.
technical.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you referred to 12-12-32, or Steve did. Do you
Yes.
want to just explain that? I'm
Yeah,
picking up on numbers.
Because
today,
I've heard
aren't
you
I?
say about high potash feeds before, and normally a tomato feed is okay, but this was different, right?
Well, essentially a tomato feed is high potash, but the ratio of potash in a tomato feed isn't as high. And Steve was saying to get that sort of, the really good flowering, and it induces winter hardiness, you need a higher percentage of potash than you'd get in a traditional tomato feed. But if you've only got tomato feed, use it, it will work. But the 12, 12, 32, there are always three numbers when you buy fertilizer, and they relate to nitrogen, phosphates and potash. Or so we've got there 12
in that order.
In that order.
Okay.
What we call NPK. So you've got nitrogen, phosphorus. Nitrogen is N, phosphorus is P, potash or potassium is K. Don't ask me why, but it is.
Who set that?
There'll be some chemistry reason.
It's
for
all
it.
exactly. There is a, it's like for salt and sodium and copper and all of these. So the first one, nitrogen, is 12%. The phosphate, which is for root growth, is 12%, and then the potash, or K, is 32%. So that's why you need that high ratio of potash when you're feeding them. If you wanted to feed cabbages, for example, then you'd go for one with a much higher nitrogen, because that promotes leaf growth.
Oh, okay. Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it was
So
a random choice, I thought, but yes, it
Yeah.
makes sense now.
Yeah.
I have to say, I'm not that keen on smashing that pot that our Agapanthus is in, because
right.
it's a really nice pot. There's nothing wrong with it.
Well,
but the top tip was to wait until it's finished flowering, let it dry out a bit, and then it will shrink a little bit.
Yeah, I'll bring it into the greenhouse over winter because they can stand being dry, and then yes, if it shrinks a little bit.
So maybe you could have
I
get the
got
saw in
visions of him with
first.
some kind of coping saw
Yeah.
going down the
Yeah,
bottom.
but if it shrinks a bit and then you saw it into four, maybe, obviously saving one bit for Steve.
He won't forget.
He won't.
He won't
Sounds
forget.
very fiddly.
But then you could maybe lift them out
I
a bit.
think we can do it.
yeah.
I'll try and save the pot,
Okay.
Jill, don't you worry.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, it's quite a nice pot.
It is a nice pot. Yeah, it is. And what we ought to also mention as well, Steve and Elaine started the business quite a while ago, Hoyland Plant Centre, but now two of his children are involved, Colin and Heather. So they are now partners within the business. Colin's been working with his dad for a number of years. So they do the shows and they do a second display. So Elaine and Steve tend to do the Agapanthus and Nerine display at the shows, but Colin and Heather are growing a different genus of plants called dioramas, which are a lovely herbaceous plant, often known as the angel's fishing rod. And they produce these lovely slender stems with flowers on the end. Absolutely beautiful. So they've started exhibiting as part of the family business in their own right. So we're in safe hands. When Steve and Elaine decide to retire, then the business will continue with all these fantastic South African plants.
I don't think Steve will ever retire.
He probably won't. No. He might go and live in South Africa because he loves his visits there and he's very well respected.
It'd be a shame. We'd miss him.
No, he
but
won't retire.
No, he
there.
won't retire.
No, he's Yorkshire through and through.
Yeah.
Right, well, just while we're thinking about shows, because obviously we chatted to Steve at Hyde Hall, didn't we, when we were there for their flower show. We also had a visit to the Potting Shed stage from Anju and Abu, the Abrahams. And Anju is a great Pots and Trowels fan, so she
Hello.
listens to the podcasts
Anju.
and watches the videos as well.
Excellent.
So that was great to meet up with them. So
brilliant.
hi to them.
Okay, and I've just got a couple of quick jobs. One of them is wisteria. So this one, Andrea, I hope you're listening. Yours won't need pruning for a few years, but if you've got an established one that you've got growing up a trellis or over a pergola and it's made all that long growth over the summer months, then what we do at this time of the year is we trace that all back and cut it to just a couple of inches from where it started. So almost back to the old wood. So it instantly tidies it up. And then what it also does, it means that all those little shoots you've pruned back to is where you'll get your flowers next year. So just do that anytime through the rest of this month into September. And finally, if you're growing onions, and our onions have done quite
They're
well this
all
year.
right,
They were
yeah.
from onion sets from King's
Better
called
than the
Stir On.
garlic.
Better than the garlic. All right, let's not mention the garlic.
The elephant garlic.
The elephant garlic's done
Elephant
very well,
garlic's all
thank
right.
you. But the onions have done very well. The tops are now starting to naturally fall over. They're at the end of their growth period. So if yours are doing that, just bend the tops over so the sun can get to the bulbs. And when the foliage dies back a bit more, within the next week or two, you can just gently put a little fork under, lift them, take them out, dry them off. The secret to storing onions over winter is to dry them in the sun. And then they'll store through the winter months. So just a couple of quick jobs to do.
Can I ask a question? Did you take that personally about the garlic then? I'm just intrigued.
Not at all. No.
Okay. Because it was outside your control though, isn't it? Right?
Yeah, but it's not my fault.
Just
it's the weather.
It's just annoying.
They were planted as normal and they were going well, but they got this disease on called rust. And it's interesting, we've been talking about garlic at lots of the shows, and lots of people have had the same problem. So it's, I know you're
Marley might have had the same problem as well.
Marley's ready to
sympathising
go.
with me, aren't you?
Absolutely. Quick one on rust. I think somebody asked us a question about how you treat rust. Is there anything you can do? Do you have to just cut off the affected area?
Yeah, there are no fungicides that are really effective. You might get one or two fungicides that you could use on roses, maybe fuchsias, but they're not that effective really. But certainly on edible crops, garlic, onions, leeks, get it, there's nothing you can use. So you've just got to hope the weather isn't too wet when the spores are around, and take off a few leaves.
I think Marley's hoping the weather's not too wet.
Exactly.
He's basically telling me that our time is up and I need to take him out for a walk.
He's been really good.
He has been good.
He's been laying on his blanket.
Marley.
It's the end of the podcast.
Marley, woof woof. Hello, woof woof. Good boy.
And that means the end of another podcast.
Bye now.
Pots Trowels team. Bye.
Bye.
See you next week.
See you. Watch the videos on YouTube or Facebook, follow us on Instagram, Twitter or X, and subscribe to the podcast and never miss a thing. For more information, go to potsandtrowels.com.